Well, good evening. It's 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Brussels time, and thank you very much for joining me for this Facebook Live. First time I'm trying it, so please forgive any sort of glitches if it's not as smooth as sort of the Jeremy Paxmans or the Andrew Neils or other presenters you might see. I'm Syed Kamall. I'm a member of the European Parliament for London. I'm also the leader of the European Conservatives and Reformists group, which is the third largest of the 8 political groups in Brussels, in the European Parliament. My group has 74 MEPs from 18 different countries. And one of the roles that I'm playing is probably the most senior Brit in Brussels, is that I am elected Brit in the European Parliament, is a very valuable role as a bridge between the UK and the EU. I know many of the people in the British government. I also know a number of the people here involved in negotiations, and I speak regularly to them. What I want to see at the end of the day is a better relationship, a new relationship, in the interests of both the UK and the EU as much as possible. And we have a better relationship and a more honest relationship going forward. So let's first of all talk about this Facebook Live on Brexit today. A bit of housekeeping. First of all, please do share to others during the Facebook Live. Please feel free to tweet. Please feel free to like or follow, get the message out, and please feel free to comment. We have about 30 minutes. And I'll try to answer all the questions. If I can't answer all your questions in those 30 minutes, we'll try and answer them over the next few weeks on social media. Also, just to say that I'm doing a second Brexit survey. I did one earlier this year. You may well have seen the videos with some of the results from those Brexit surveys last week and earlier this week. We've got a new survey coming out, and you can go to syedkamall.co.uk/survey to fill out those questions. And please do feel free to go to that survey and fill out the questions. Let's go to let's see some of the questions. What I should do really is open the other screen to make sure I can see that some of the other questions coming in. And then we'll see what we can answer as we go live. Perfect. Okay, so some people sent in questions earlier. So let's see some of the first questions. First question is, Jordan, I'm 17 years old. How will Brexit affect me? If I want to go to France to learn to cook French food, do I need a visa? And how will the UK be strong by 2019? Well, first, Jordan, can I wish you the very best in your career ambitions? I think it's great that we've got British chefs going all around the world, and great that you want to go to France. We've had travel between France and the UK, in fact, between many countries for a number of different years, even before Britain joined the EU or joined the EEC in the early 1970s. And there's no reason why that should be any different this time. Clearly, the exact terms will depend on the negotiations, but actually, if you look at the rights of UK citizens with British passports to travel around the world, currently you can travel to more than 60 countries outside the EU without needing a visa. And there are also other countries where you do need a visa, but you can actually get that visa at the airport when you arrive. And so what the UK government will seek to do is negotiate an agreement where, as much as possible, there is visa-free travel. And it may well be that some EU countries do want to put up restrictions. I speak to many of my friends in other EU countries, and they're saying that they very much hope that travel at the moment can carry on as much as possible. Because the problem is not people travelling, even to work or tourism. The concerns are clearly other issues, people coming to work or business. So let's have a look at that. I'm confident that we'll get a good deal, and I hope very much to see that. Catherine says, I have a British passport and I'm a British citizen. I can travel to Europe and other non-EU countries. How would leaving the EU affect my travelling outside the UK to other countries? Will this mean that I will have to apply for a new passport? I think one of the saddest things about the referendum last year was that there's a lot of nonsense on both sides, on both the Leave and Remain camps. And one of the things I remember some people saying was, if we left the EU, you wouldn't be able to travel anywhere else, and no one would want to trade with us. That's clearly not true. You won't need to get a new passport. What will probably change is the words on your future passport will say just United Kingdom, Great Britain, Northern Ireland. It won't have the word European Union But as I said to Jordan earlier, we hope that the EU will not insist on making UK citizens need visas. But don't forget, there are many countries in the world that you don't, outside the EU that you don't need a visa for. And we very much hope that the EU will continue not needing visas for us. So that very much depends on the negotiations. We're at the start of negotiations. There's lots of tough words on both sides, and that's what you'd expect. And let's hope that people see sense in the end. Can I remind you, please feel free to share the live stream. Please feel free to tweet. Please feel free to ask any questions. And please put in comments below. Rashid asks a question now. He says, would the Germans stop selling Mercedes-Benz, Audi, Volkswagen, Bosch and Siemens products to the UK? Or will Lidl and Aldi stop investing in the supermarkets? Or will the French stop selling us their wine? And will the Belgians stop selling us their chocolates? Or will the Spanish stop selling us their Satsumas? It seems to be that there are some people who think that no one will sell to us and that it's just a favour. Well, that's a very good point. It's very much a two-way street. We will be one of the EU's biggest export markets. Let's not forget that the UK is probably the world's 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. Even if we weren't members of the EU now, what would happen is if you were the EU and you had the 5th or 6th largest economy next door to you and you had a lot of mutual trade, of course you'd want to do an agreement with them. And what we hope to see is a new relationship, not the UK being reluctant neighbours, so being reluctant tenants, but being good neighbours. That's the sort of more positive and more honest relationship that we hope to see in the future. Angela says, in the referendum, we democratically voted to leave the EU. My question is, why are we messing about negotiating various deals? We want to leave completely and self-govern. Well, Angela, we have been members of the EU the EC originally, for more than 40 years. And that means there are lots of our laws and lots of our relationships are quite deeply intertwined. And clearly a lot of that means that we're going to have to untangle some of that stuff before we get a new relationship. It's not as simple as sort of closing the door and leaving the keys in the post box. And of course, as well, we want a good relationship with the EU when we leave. We want a mutually beneficial relationship. And surely it's better, what's more important, is not how long it takes, but actually or how speedy we do negotiations, but actually what agreement we get. And surely it's worthwhile in trying to change the relationship with the EU, that we take our time to talk to our EU partners and hopefully have a very positive relationship at the end of the day. Surely it's better to take a bit more time and get a good relationship than by simply walking away. Don't forget you can ask me any question in the comments below this video, and I will try to answer them. So, Julie, do you believe that the EU really is determined to punish the UK for Brexit? Or will they eventually take a more pragmatic and reasonable approach to the negotiations, one that benefits all of us? Well, I think that's key. I think it should be a relationship that's mutually beneficial as much as possible. And it shouldn't be about trying to punish each other in any way. But of course, at the start of any negotiations, I've been a member of the European Parliament for more than 12 years. And of course, there's a lot of posturing at the beginning of negotiations. I've likened it to a bit of sort of chest beating or the weigh-in before a fight. I've also likened it to the haka before the England-New Zealand rugby game, where both sides stare each other in the faces and you make all sorts of threatening sounds. Then you play a game of rugby, and then at the end of the game, both sides walk away as friends. So let's make sure that we have that same attitude. Of course, you'll hear on both sides of the press. I speak to friends and some of them say, "Oh, we think that the UK is doing better in negotiations." Others say to me that the EU is doing better in negotiations. The truth is, it's too early to tell. What's happening is that both sides are putting forward their positions. Both sides are trying to negotiate. Both sides will push as much as they can. And in any negotiations, you will always ask for more than you actually want. That's part of the negotiating tactics. You've also got to be prepared that sometimes one party might walk away. That's the way negotiations happen. And then you come back and you try and get a better deal. So let's have a look at this. Next question from Kevin Dowd. I assume that you favour a fairly open immigration policy. If so, do you agree that the UK should not discriminate, as it currently does, against immigrants from outside the EU? Well, immigration was clearly one of the big issues in the negotiations, in the referendum. And there were people on both sides who talked about immigration as an issue. And one of the things that I found and other people talked about is they want to see a fair immigration system. Now, we don't have a fair immigration system. What we have at the moment is a system where anyone from the EU can come here and work. So we have an immigration system that's favourable towards people from the EU, most of whom happen to be white. And then we have all sorts of barriers to people from outside the EU, most of whom happen to be non-white. So I've had many people describe this as a racist immigration system, whether deliberately or otherwise. So what we now need is a fair immigration system where everyone outside the UK is treated equally, whether they're from the EU or not from the EU, and we get the very best talent globally. That's what we want to see. We want to be an open country, the best talent possible, but let's have a proper debate about immigration. What I mean about what skills do we need? Let's make sure we get the right people and the skills we actually need and people who want to come here and contribute. And let's make sure we don't discriminate against people from outside the EU and we have a fair system where people are treated equally. So whether you're from the EU or not from the EU, we are open to the best talent in the world. Verity Collins says, scaremongers are saying that if we leave the EU, we won't have cooperation between our NHS and European medical care. But as Britain's medical care is some of the worst in Europe, and we lag behind the rest of the EU in survival rates for cancer, heart problems, will Brexit make the difference? If so, as Medicine is International, why can't we use Brexit to rethink cooperation between EU nations in exchanging medical matters, and in the process make the NHS look to Europe to improve our medical care? I expect cooperation to continue after Brexit in all sorts of areas. And one of the things that we have to keep remembering is that there's a world outside the EU. So when we're talking about international cooperation, people sometimes get fixated. There's almost a sort of little European mentality that international cooperation means only the EU. And I'll give you an example. I used to be an academic, and when I lectured at universities, my colleagues used to apply for something called the Jean Monnet Funds or Jean Monnet Chairs or Jean Monnet Fellowships. And what was interesting was we ran courses on international business and international trade, and we were told to rename our courses from international business to European business. So rather than teaching about the whole world, we were told that we had to teach about Europe. Of course, I know some of my colleagues, actually what they did, they took the money, renamed the courses European business, but actually taught international business, and we carried on with that global vision. It's really important that we carry on and we make it quite clear that this is a global vision, not a sort of little European mentality. I can see some of you asking questions in the comments. I'll get to them in just a second, but feel free to add any more questions you like. Eloise asks, how long do you think that the EU is going to last now? Well, I'm not one of those people who expects the EU to fall apart. The referendum wasn't about the end of the EU. The referendum was about whether Britain should remain a member or not. Did we want Britain to be part of a European Union that was progressing towards a political union, towards a United States of Europe? And quite clearly, you saw the referendum results. The British people voted not to be part of a United States of Europe. We want trade, we want cooperation, and that's the sort of relationship we're going to see. And is it really in our interest? We want to see a prosperous EU because it's in our interest, because we want companies in the EU to have a prosperous economy so they can sell to us and they have customers who want to buy British products and services. So, I hope that we don't see that sort of, I don't think the EU is going to fall apart. And there are people in the EU who want to continue to see reform. You'll see behind me the logo of the European Conservatives and Reformers Group. We are 74 MEPs from 18 different countries. And after the UK leave, the European Conservatives and Reformists will continue to exist to keep pushing that message of reform in the EU. Stop this going towards this 1950s post-war model of a United States of Europe or a Federal Republic of Europe, and actually let's have a more flexible, business-friendly, creating jobs in Europe rather than the EU that we see at the moment. Don't forget to share this on the live stream and tweet it, and please feel free to share our questions. I hope I pronounced your name properly. Kish or Kiss Levente Sandor. The British pound is getting weaker and weaker. I believe by the end of the year, the euro will be stronger than the British pound. Do you have a plan B for dealing with the situation? Well, the long-term position of the pound is what matters. But two things. I don't share your pessimistic view. And also, I've never been one of these people who says that the strength of your currency is a great thing, unnecessarily, but in itself, and it's a sort of macho alpha currency issue. And I'll give you whenever the UK pound was doing very well, I would get complaints from exporters who would say to me, "We need a weaker sterling. Sterling, the pound is far too strong." Now I'm hearing exporters say to me, "It's great, we're sending more products." I think the newspapers have been full of stories about how our exports are going up. But of course, you'll get people on the other side who say, the rising pound falling impacts them. If it was the other way around and the pound was suddenly very, very, very strong, a lot of our exporters would complain. That is the world of floating exchange rates, and you get that all the time. And many businesses prepare for floating exchange rates, and at times they do well out of it, and at times they do less well. But thanks very much for your live question. Feel free to ask anything in the comments below. Nathan asks, in the Financial Times, they highlighted about 750 trade agreements that the EU has with third countries. I was wondering what our trade agreements will be with those countries with which the EU already has trade agreements and regulatory agreements. Is there some international rules convention in which these trade agreements continue? The short answer, but simple answer, is that in many ways we'd be quite happy to replicate some of these agreements, and some of the countries have actually said to me and said to us, the UK, for example, Canada has said they very much welcome a trade agreement with the UK, very much along the EU-Canada agreement. I know the Japanese have said the same thing, that they would like a trade agreement with us. So, of course, we're not necessarily going to have these trade agreements overnight, but it's quite clear that the Department of International Trade that has been set up to sign these new trade agreements has already started work trying to line up as many trade agreements as possible before we leave the EU. So when we leave the EU, we're not just suddenly scrabbling around, we're having as many of these conversations as we can before we leave the EU and we have a new relationship. Now, of course, looking at some of the EU templates, it is easier than starting with a blank sheet, but there might be things in the existing EU agreements that we may not want in a UK agreement with some of these countries. But one of the things we should not forget, and I used to lecture international trade, is that you don't need trade agreements to trade. There are many businesses in the UK that trade with companies in other countries outside the UK, and the UK does not have a trade agreement with them. Who likes trade agreements? Trade negotiators like trade agreements. Businesses like to trade. And of course, trade agreements with regulatory cooperation and non-tariff barriers being reduced quite often helps facilitates trade, but also it may divert trade at the same time. So what we need to do, and this is why I'm very pleased that Liam Fox, as Department of International Trade, they're really getting on with the job of trying to talk and negotiate as many trade agreements as possible. And this may well be part of the conversation that we have in our negotiations about how long we remain part of some of the EU agreements. We just have to watch this space and trust our negotiators. Please remind people to share the live stream and tweet. And please keep sending us your questions, and hopefully we'll try and answer them. If we can't answer all of them in the remaining 10 minutes left, then we'll try and answer the questions over the next few weeks on social media. So we very much hope that we can do that. Got a question from Aubrey Price. Can't we walk away and deal directly with the other individual EU governments? No, because at the moment, the 27 EU countries have agreed together that they will negotiate as the EU 27, and the council that represents the EU 27 has asked Michel Barnier to lead those negotiations, so the European Commission, on behalf of the European Council, and the EU is trying to show a united face as much as possible. Now, I've spoken to a number of the prime ministers and ministers from these different countries, and what they're saying to me is, of course, we will stay as united as we can as much as possible, because we want to act in unity. But if it gets to a stage where we might be facing a cliff edge, and where we feel that our exporters, our companies who sell to the UK might be at a disadvantage, or we might be facing a cliff edge, then we will put more and more pressure on the EU negotiators. So just as in the UK, we have an opposition party that keeps changing its mind to try and put pressure on the British government, on negotiators, and we have people who want to stop Brexit because they want to put pressure on the United Kingdom government. At the same time, we will have individual governments and politicians from various EU countries who want to put pressure on the EU. So we'll get pressure on both sides. Can I remind you to share the live stream and tweet? Keep sending your questions. Right, the next question is from Winnie. Syed, voting for Brexit was like buying a house without even seeing the artist's impression and without the lawyer's terms and cost. I think none of the questions can be answered. That's a very optimistic question to put in a question. However, you know the influences in Brussels better than David, Boris and Theresa. You know them as people over time who have served in Brussels. What can you do over and above the Westminster politicians to ensure that Brexit is smooth? Smooth in terms of immigration, trade, law, human rights. It's difficult for us because we have to worry about the uncertainty. Well, Winnie, you're absolutely right to say that we are treading new ground and that we are having to draw our own plan or map as we go along. But I think I think we can be optimistic. And personally, as you say, what's my role here? I know people in the British government. I speak to ministers about the negotiations. I also speak to people here in Brussels. I speak to Michel Barnier. I speak to commissioners. I meet regularly with ministers and prime ministers who pop by the European Parliament to come and see me. And what's really important at the end of the day is that we have a mutually beneficial relationship as much as possible. Of course, both sides will have to play for the domestic audiences. I understand that. That's part of politics. And both sides, at the start of negotiations, will want to be tough. So one side will put up a position paper and the other side will say, oh, that's rubbish and that's nonsense. That's all part of negotiations. But behind the scenes, they will get down to the technical detail. One of the things that the UK government is asking at the moment is that the EU has come up with some papers and the UK government is actually asking questions, saying, hold on a minute, why have you asked for this? So, for example, why are you insisting that EU citizens in the UK are given more rights than UK citizens in the UK? Is that really fair? What's your justification for this? Now, it's sad that the main opposition party in the UK has said that they actually support giving EU citizens in the UK more rights than UK citizens in the UK. But it just shows what sort of pressure that both sides are under. But I'll continue to work with both sides. I'll continue to meet with government ministers. I'll continue to meet with ministers and prime ministers from other EU countries, as well as commission officials and others, to try and smooth over and also reduce any of the misunderstandings. If they read something in the British papers and maybe it's been blown out of proportion by one side or the other, I will try and smooth that over and maybe explain the other side of the argument. We've got a live question. Shafiq, the EU is insisting that we pay them this massive divorce payment, but the assets that they own come from our contribution, and this never gets mentioned. Surely we must own a big share from it. That's right. That's quite right. We do own a share. We do own shares. We do own. In fact, we do actually. In fact, in reality, we have shares in a number of buildings and institutions here, and a bit of the European EIB's loan stock, for example. So it's far, and it's not as simple as people are saying. Some of the more intransigent people on the EU side saying that actually we just pay up and walk away. At the end of the day, as you rightly say, we have some assets here, and that's part of the negotiations. And whenever I mention that to people, they say, "Of course, we understand that. That's all part of the negotiations." So that will have to be considered. But we'll be pointing that out calmly and with determination, and we'll make sure at the end of the day that we try and come to an agreement which both sides are happy with. Nicholas Morris, I'm from Trinidad and support Brexit, as will allow for more direct trade between the UK and the Commonwealth Caribbean. Do you think it's possible? Well, I very much hope so. My parents are Guyanese. I have a father-in-law who's from Mauritius. My ancestors are from the Indian subcontinent. So I'm very much a fan of the Commonwealth. And I think it's shocking that over the last 40 years how much we've neglected our very strong links with the Commonwealth. And let's not kid ourselves. This is not what some of the opponents of Brexit make it out to be, going back to imperial days. This is an equal relationship with Commonwealth countries. This is not Britain as the old imperial master. This is us as friends and trading partners. And let's not forget, some of these countries, these dynamic countries in the Commonwealth who have strong relationships with the UK. I've spoken to a number of ambassadors, ministers from Commonwealth countries, and they are really happy that that we are now talking about direct trade relationships with them. Also, I've spoken to a number of developing countries who say, actually, they're fed up of some of the trade policies of the EU that they feel keeps them poor because they can't sell their goods into the EU. So let's make sure that we try and get as many trade deals with Commonwealth countries as much as possible. And let's make sure it's mutually beneficial. Okay, I've been told that I've got about 5 minutes left. Thank you again for your questions and comments. Please ask them. Keep asking your questions. If I can't answer them all in the next 5 minutes, don't worry. I will try and make sure that we answer them in social media over the next few weeks. Lee asks a question. He says, how can we retain financial clearinghouses in the UK after Brexit? And Anu says, do Paris and Frankfurt pose a real threat to the City of London as new financial centres when Britain leaves the European Union? So let me take the two of them together. Well, Lee, first of all, clearing will continue after Brexit. The whole issue is whether euro-denominated instruments can continue to be cleared. What's fascinating is that we still trade many dollar-denominated instruments here in the UK, and the US has been quite clear about this. They're not seeking to be nationalistic about this and insist that it's all traded in New York. Because actually, one of the reasons that people do a lot of clearing in the UK is because we trade a number of different currencies. And because we trade baskets of currencies, we've got efficiencies, we reduce costs. And one of the things that I know, speaking to some of the European companies who are worried about this, they worry that if France and Germany insisted on trying to move anything in euros to the Eurozone, all the infrastructure, all the new cables, all the new wires that would involve, but would also mean increased costs for some of their transactions, and it would lead to more costs for the companies. So that's why they prefer to clear in the UK, which has the skills, but also we clear a number of different currencies. Now, the French and Germans may be insistent. They may continue on this road of Euro nationalism, insisting that anything dominating in euros is cleared in the Eurozone. And I imagine they will continue trying to put pressure. But I know there are many other people who are saying to me that, they're really worried that, and these are European companies saying to me, that this will increase their financial costs, because clearing in the Eurozone would cost them more because they won't have the advantages of the UK. Please remember to share the live stream and tweet. Why are they not providing a costed paper on the divorce settlement figure? This is from Warren Whiteley or Whitley. If by they, Warren, you mean the EU side negotiation, this is one of the reasons that the UK government has actually been asking probing questions. They have been asking the EU negotiators, can you be quite clear with us how you justify that figure? I think it was a few months ago when the figure suddenly went up from 10 billion to 50 billion to 100 billion within a space of a week. Now, I know what this is all about. This is a classic negotiating technique. What you do in negotiations, you ask for more than you want, and then you know it will be whittled down. You do that, and I know I've been in Brussels for 12 years. I've seen this in negotiations on European directives. You ask for far more, and then you come to a compromise later. I can see that. So right. So that's it. I'm being told it's about 5 minutes left, so I'm running out of time. If I haven't got to your question, I'm really sorry. Please don't worry. I'll be answering them all over the next few weeks on Facebook right here. But I just wanted to draw your attention to my next survey, just to finish off. Last week, I had some videos that I showed you the results of the survey that I carried out earlier this year. Now, I want to get your latest thoughts on Brexit. More than 6 months later, how do you feel? Now, if you're on a computer, please go to syedkamall.co.uk/survey. But let me give you a flavour of some of the questions that you'll find on the new survey. I'll be asking about the main factor that influenced your decision to vote the way that you did in the referendum. I will also be asking about whether your intentions changed. And if the referendum was today, would you change your mind? And if so, why? I'll be asking about how you'll be personally impacted by our decision to leave the EU, and also what sort of immigration system do you want to see? You saw in the question there from Kevin and from others, people talking about a fairer immigration system now that we're leaving. Do you agree? Do you want to see a fair immigration system where everyone outside the UK is treated equally? Or do you want to give preference to the EU? Do you think it's fair that we give preference to the EU? And does it bother you that most of the people from the EU happen to be white and most of the people outside the EU happen to be non-white? Is that a racist immigration system? Or do you think it's justified giving preference to the EU? How strong do you think the UK's negotiating position will be? And how strong do you think the EU's negotiating position is? So please go to the survey, www.syedkamall.co.uk survey, and answer questions. Can I thank you very much for joining me today? I hope you found it really useful. If you did, I'll try and do it again. And please do fill in the survey, share the links, and let more people know. And let's make sure that we get a really good picture on your feelings on Brexit as the negotiations continue. I will continue to update my constituents in London. I'll continue to update people via social media, via Twitter, on my activities, but also on the Brexit negotiations as much as I can. Thank you very much.